Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today we got a really cool article about the Pictish people, or the Picts, of ancient Scotland about 1700 years ago. This is from Live Science contributor Owen Jarris. Now this guy is awesome, by the way. I've read a few of his articles from Live Science, and he's right up my alley with all this stuff that he covers. Like linguistic stuff, ancient ruins, anything to do with archaeology, really. So you guys should definitely follow him on Twitter. I think it's Jarris. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but this guy is really cool. And give him a follow if you have Twitter, and follow all of his. He tweets out a lot of cool stuff, a lot of cutting edge articles and stuff like that. I mean, this guy is on the cutting edge. Yeah, give him a follow. He deserves it. If you guys don't know who the Picts are, they're people who lived in Scotland at the time of the Romans, when the Romans were occupying what's now England. They were successful in rebuffing a lot of Roman invasions and kept them from occupying their lands. They had a writing system up until now. I mean, up until this article came out. No, well, not just this article, but this new excavation results and research came out. It was believed that their writing system was just scattered Ogham, which is the Irish writing system. And I'll show you guys pictures of Ogham here. So yeah, here's an example of some Ogham. But actually, their writing system now is being proposed are these things, these stones that have been carved in stones, and it's being purported that it was in response to the Roman language. So here's a good picture of it. So it looks like a photo. It looks like some sort of inscription, and not really a language. But I mean, you can see some repeating. These circles appear on a lot of these tablets or stones. This one obviously looks like a fish. This looks like some sort of pyramid with a half crescent moon over it. Again, these circles. So I guess at the time, people just off as just, these are just carvings in stone and they can't be dated, so there we go. But upon closer inspection, a lot of the archaeologists, after having done excavations, they've decided that this is probably the beginnings of some sort of literacy, some writing system. And this is at a site called Dunacar, which is on the east coast of Scotland. And you can see a small, here's a map, here's a better map of this right here. So it's close to the natural arches, this Dunacar here. And they found a fortress, an old fortress next to these stones, and they dated the fortress back to 300, I think. Well, anyway, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's take us back to 1700 years ago, about 300 AD. The Romans are deep into England, and they are basically in conflict with the Picts here. And by the way, the Picts was just a name given by the Romans, which basically referred to their painted skin. So these people painted their skin with tattoos, war paint, kind of like if you've seen Braveheart, sort of like that. So they were known as fierce fighters. They practiced polyamory. They had tattoos. They were very reminiscent of like the Maori or some of the other indigenous people of Australia. Anyway, there's some new, in the Journal of Antiquity, there was some new research published that this group of people got the idea for a written language from the Romans. Now, this is a huge, I don't want to say assumption, but it's a huge claim, because who knows what their intentions were. I mean, we're talking about people who lived almost 2,000 years ago, so it's really hard to say one way or another what their intentions were and what their responses were. And also with stuff carved in stone, it's pretty hard to say either way, but their justification is interesting, so let's just go over it. First of all, these symbols were carved on stone, bone, metalwork, other artifacts like trinkets, amulets, stuff like that, jewelry. And then there is a growing consensus that the symbols on these stones are an early form of language. So this is Gordon Noble, the head of archaeology at the University of Aberdeen. This is what he's saying. And here's another good picture. This is a really good one, actually. It's around a wall. And again, you see this serpent-like drawing up here on the top left, and then these circles, almost concentric circles with a dot in the middle. They kind of look like buttons. They're also connected by this little diagonal bridge thing. And you see this recurrently. So let's go back to these other photos, and you can see it's very reminiscent, right? So on first glance, this just looks like just some sort of illustration, just some sort of geometry, right? But actually, they think it's a writing language. It's unclear when or how this language developed. Some scholars believed it was invented during the Middle Ages, after the Romans left Britain. So the initial scholars thought this is pretty late in the game, not too long ago. Middle Ages was like 1,000 years or less. So as you can see, there's a lot of guesswork involved up until now. The scientists with the Northern Picts Project conducted new excavations at archaeological sites where stones with Pictish symbols had been discovered in the past. So they visited all these different these stones and these archaeological sites. They dug up remains of a fort, which was probably served as a place for protecting people and maybe as for trade or something like that, probably on the Roman frontier. And then they dated the fort between the 2nd and 4th century AD. So this is around 1700 years ago. But so here's, okay, you have stone, okay, which you can't date the stones themselves. So the best thing you can do is date the organic material around the stone, and then you can, the best you can hope for is there are people who lived at that time around the stone. So they dated these to the between 2nd and 4th centuries AD. But the stones could have easily been there longer, and maybe someone in the remote past had either placed those stones there or made those inscriptions. Somehow they leave, and then the Picts come in later, and then they occupy the land. That's also a possibility as well. The researchers also studied a wooden enclosure found at another Pictish site called Rhynie. I think that's how you spell it, Rhynie. So they dated the enclosure, and it revealed that it was in use between the 4th and 6th centuries AD, so a little bit younger. So again, we have this issue where the best you can do is date the organic material around the stone. The scientists concluded that the Pictish language was likely developed in the 3rd or 4th century AD. So based on this dating, they think it was developed at this time. I don't know. It's definitely a possibility, but how long does it take to develop a universal language agreed upon by a group such as the Picts, who seem to be kind of scattered all throughout Scotland, but also came together and formed a cohesive unity enough to rebuff the Romans. So it's how organized were these people? Were they just a loose conglomeration of tribes that recognized a unified threat like the Romans? Or were they more sophisticated or less sophisticated and just sort of were flying by the seat of their pants, so to speak? We don't really know because there's not a lot of evidence left. Some experts think that they were inspired by the Romans, who used the writing system at the time, which was Latin, and there were alphabets and stuff. But you can see that this is way different. I mean, it doesn't seem like they have an alphabet, unless like this is more like hieroglyphics, where it's just an image-based iconography rather than lettering. I mean, and then these fish, these two throw me off too. Is this part of the language as well? I don't know. These just look like images to me. The Picts developed a writing style that was quite different from that language. They spoke of... They were okay, so the Picts are kind of a mystery wrapped in enigma because their spoken language, some experts thought that it was not Indo-European influence. They thought that it was just like Finnish, like it was just its own thing, or it came from some other source rather than the Indo-Europeans. So right off the bat, you have some mystery about their spoken language. And then their written language up until now was thought to have been Ogham, which I showed you earlier, which was from Ireland, because they did find some scattered Ogham scripts and inscriptions around Scotland. But there wasn't enough to really form a strong enough argument that that's what they were exclusively writing in. And then you have this language that is now being purported in response to the Romans. Around the time that the Picts were developing this language, there were other writing systems that were definitely written in response to the Romans, such as runes, which came in Scandinavia and Germany, and Ogham, which I showed you earlier. So these are runes. You can see that this is more in line with how the Romans wrote their sentences and stuff. It's more linear, left to right, as you can see, and each letter corresponded to some sort of sound, and they broke down what each symbol meant, so they have a translation, whereas here they don't. It's just a bunch of recurring symbols over and over again in lines. And I'm not saying it's gibberish. It's obviously something. This is obviously something. But did the Picts do it? I don't know. There's probably going to need to be more further excavations. The interesting part is, though, the Romans never conquered Ireland, Scandinavia, Germany, or modern day Scotland, but they had contact with them. So again, this is some scientists use this as evidence that this inspired those respective peoples to create their own writing systems, and so they can kind of and reap whatever benefits that they got from that. The researchers wrote, as with runes and Ogham, the Pictish symbols were also probably created beyond the frontier in response to Roman literacy. I feel like if you were gonna create something in response to an adversary, it'd probably resemble somewhat Latin, or the way they construct sentences and meaning in Latin, kind of like how the runes were, like I showed you earlier, and Ogham to a certain degree as well. It seems that this Pictish written language is really maybe there was a non-Indo-European group that landed in Scotland a long time ago and just settled there, and then eventually just stayed there a little bit. I mean, there is genetic evidence that the people in I don't know, I'm not sure about the Picts, but the people in Scotland have some novel DNA, but that could just be from living apart from other, like being an offshoot of another population. And then there is also a lot of theories that, like I said earlier, their language was not Indo-European, and that some people thought that they were Scythians that made it there. I don't know if these are true, but the fact that they exist and there was speculation at that time, I mean, that says something. And I know that Scythian thing was rejected outright by some academics, but nevertheless, there was enough mystery surrounding these people that prompted some expert to make that claim. And I guess it was justified to make that claim because of how shrouded in mystery these people were. And it's unlikely that Pictish will be deciphered unless a text written in both Pictish and unknown language is discovered, which it might exist out there. Further excavations will be necessary to flesh that out. What do you guys think about this? Do you think oh yeah, by the way, this was written later in the Middle Ages, and this was someone's attempt at deciphering Ogham. So you can see these lines are Ogham, and then what's written next to it, I think, is like those notes that they're basically corresponding with the meanings of each thing. So, but again, you can kind of see, as with the runes, it's very similar to how Latin and other European languages are written. I mean, there are obvious letters, but with the Pictish, it's not like that at all. So, I mean, it seems so unrelated, and I don't know. I guess I'm just waiting for more evidence to come out, to really maybe some smoking gun evidence, because right now they just dated forts next to the stones, and it's just hard to go by that. And I mean, if I was a Pict living at that time and then I came across these stones, I would definitely think they were A, peculiar, and B, probably important enough to either protect or set up shop next to, because it's in my homeland. So I don't know how the Picts themselves regarded these stones, and it'd be interesting to see if they find an account, or maybe there's a Roman account somewhere that we can decipher, and maybe we can get their 2 cents on it. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the comments and on Sunday.